Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining us. It is the weekend edition here on Point of View. Next Friday, well, that's Christmas, so we won't be doing that. The Friday after that is the first of the year, so this might be the last weekend edition, although we're going to do a year-end edition on the 31st, so I might mention that. So
I always like the New Year's Eve
Yes,
show.
and that'll be great, and you will be there, and Kelly will be there. But today we have Penna Dexter, by the way, you want to watch online. We've got a Christmas tree. We've got her in red, and so it's looking very Christmassy. Us guys are in blue, Dr. Merrill Matthews and I, but nevertheless, we know who's the star here anyway.
We're blue reflecting 2020.
I love the blue. I love that winter blue. It's
so
great.
Anyway, that is the case. We have a lot to cover, and as a matter of fact, we're going to try to give you some update. I've been advertising that Penna was going to be on, and Dr. Merrill Matthews, because we want to talk about the vaccine and a number of other things. But I thought I'd start out with a fun piece that you can find at ipi.org. If you go to our website, it will take you there. It's an organization, by the way, that I've mentioned more than once. I think you should support. We, of course, are coming to year end, and we have a matching fund, and I know that you could support IPI as well, the Institute for Policy Innovation. But Dr. Merrill Matthews, you posted this one, and I love this. Biden, take note. Businesses flee to Texas because economic policies matter. And you give us a growing list of various companies that have said, so long, California. Hello, Texas. Tell us about that.
Well, Elon Musk is coming. He's already he's moving to the Austin area, I believe. And, of course, part of his companies are already here. We heard Hewlett Packard is coming. Uber is coming. Oracle just announced that it's coming. Toyota came 4 years ago. And this is in part efforts by former Governor Rick Perry and current Governor Greg Abbott to bring these companies here from California. But they wouldn't be leaving. That it costs a lot of money, and there's a lot of disruption in moving. There's reasons why they're coming to Texas, and it's because California is proud of its high taxes, high regulation, wokeness, and other things, and Texas is proud of its low taxes, light regulatory touch, business-friendly climate, and various businesses, major businesses around the country are saying it's time to get to Texas because we just simply can't tolerate California and its policies anymore.
Last week, we talked a bit about Elon Musk coming and the fact that part of his reasoning personally to move here, not just to bring his companies here, was because of the capital gains tax in California. They have a 13.3% tax on capital gains. We don't have one in Texas. So he saves a lot of money, especially since he's got like $18 billion in stock options. So, but I saw a piece too by Chuck DeVore, Texas Public Policy Foundation. Now Oracle's exiting California for Texas. Well, the last one in Silicon Valley, please turn out the lights. And that's true too. As a matter of fact, COVID has affected that because a lot of these tech workers, people in Silicon Valley that work there, found out during lockdowns that they could work anywhere in the country. And some of these companies are saying, we don't even need to have them on site. They can be wherever. And so they're earning their nice salaries from, San Francisco based salaries. And they are living in, Montana or somewhere, wherever they want to live. and they're finding out that that's a great way to live, and many of them won't be going back to Silicon Valley.
Though I've heard that some of the companies are thinking about reducing their salaries by a percentage point because they don't have the high cost of living in San Francisco anymore.
Well, they have to keep these employees too, though. They're tough employees
They
sometimes
do.
to retain, so that'll be a balancing act.
But a lot of them are coming to Texas. Some are going to Arizona. Some are going to Colorado. But the point I made in there is, if you're a liberal-leaning company, because a lot of these Silicon Valley companies are liberal-leaning, then you move to Austin, and that's where we're seeing a lot of them go. But if you're McKesson, which is a large pharmacy benefit manager, they're moving to Irving. There's a lot of options here, and it is back about earlier this year. There was a company that did a sort of an assessment of what's happening to how that's going to affect congressional representation. California is actually losing people. Its population is declining for the first time ever, and the prediction was that after this coming census, they will lose one congressional seat for the first time ever, and that Texas will gain either 2 or 3 seats.
Yeah,
Wow.
we did talk about that. Let's talk about salaries just for a minute before we take a break, because yesterday my commentary pointed out that in San Francisco, which is also proud of its taxes, because your piece here talks about how no state is prouder of higher taxes, onerous regulations, and heavy-handed government mandates than California. But there's a one-upmanship with San Francisco. For example, in most of the state, if you have to quarantine, it's 10 days, which is CDC. San Francisco, you have to quarantine 14 days. But the one I mentioned yesterday is they've now implemented an overpaid executive tax. So if you are paid too much as an executive, this is a tax on part of a tax. And my prediction is that some of the companies in San Francisco are going to say, just to move out of San Francisco to the San Joaquin Valley is going to save us money. To move out of San Francisco to Texas is going to save us a lot of money, right?
And not just the company. There is no state income tax.
Yes.
Or individual income tax in Texas. So you don't have to. You can avoid the 6, 7, 8% if you move to Texas. And given some of those salaries, it's a big number.
Yes. Well, Washington State is another state that does not have a state income tax, but they have a problem there because what they actually had was a head tax for any company that makes more than $20 million a year. And so all of a sudden you start saying, wait a minute, have you noticed that lately Amazon and Boeing still keep their headquarters there, but they're building outside of the state of Washington because their progressives are sleepless in Seattle. They're always looking for ways to actually kill the golden goose.
And the day may come where after they set some factories up in other states, they say, we're just going to go ahead and move our headquarters to those states.
Yeah, you can see exactly what's going to happen.
Kind of like Elon Musk. What do you think will happen in Texas? Because I hear mixed, kind of predictions about, okay, all these people coming that are on the left and, they're famously leftists, they're now moving for economic reasons. So they must understand that these free market policies actually are good. But are they going to come, maybe on the social issues, are they going to come and change the state of Texas, by their sheer numbers? Because if you're working for one of these big companies, Oracle, and you get this opportunity to go to Texas, a lot of people do come. They stay employed and they come. But you're bringing all these liberals into Texas. Does that scare you, buddy?
I raised that question back in January as to whether or not people were coming. The Dean Stansel, who's at SMU, an economist at SMU, published a piece in the Dallas Morning News in November where he says, no, we've looked at post-election polls. This was after the election, and people who were native tended to vote more for Joe Biden than those who moved to the state. Having said that, I've seen another poll which said we checked these post-election polls, and in fact, a lot of the people who are moving to Texas are younger and tend to be bringing their blue policies with them. So it's not clear to me where that is yet, but it didn't work out for them in this election.
Yeah, it did not. But it's something to think about, and I think Penna's raised that issue before, and I can remember speaking to a Republican group a while back where they said, this is not good because all these people are coming to California. But at the time, we were saying a lot of them were the people most inclined to vote for Ted Cruz. But again, we'll see where this plays out in the next couple of months and years. If nothing else, while we're talking about losing a congressional seat and gaining one, when we come back from the break, just before we get into one of the other articles, let's talk about this because the state legislatures have increased in Republican content. And, of course, even the state legislature here, they're going to be drawing those congressional districts. So we'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, our world has changed significantly since the November election, and that raises the reasonable question of whether we've been played. Victor Davis Hanson provides a few examples in a recent commentary, and I will add some others. For example, perhaps you have noticed the disappearance of all the protests. Where is Antifa and BLM? A week or two before the election, the flood of violence in cities subsided, perhaps for fear that it might affect the election. Has systemic racism and excessive force by police just disappeared? What about all the concerns about the coronavirus? Not so long ago, Andrew Cuomo, Joe Biden, and Kamala Harris expressed their concerns about the Trump vaccine. Now it seems like it'll be successful. They might even decide to call it the Biden vaccine. And isn't it interesting that Pfizer only announced their progress on the vaccine after the election? In fact, this summer, executives at the company did not update the president or the media about their progress. They only contacted the Biden campaign. 3 months ago, we were hearing from Democratic leaders that it was dangerous to send kids back to school. That's why we had to shut down the schools and reject the calls from the president and the Secretary of Education to get students back in the classroom. Now it's time for the kids to go back to school. You know, 4 years ago, many Democratic leaders and the media suspected that voting machines might have been hacked. Even last year, you had Senator Elizabeth Warren concerned about unsecured computer systems and ambiguous rules about matching signatures on ballots. Now they argue the electoral system is perfect. Any claims of fraud are either insignificant or non-existent. Yes, so much has changed in the last few weeks, and it is tempting to think that all of us have been played. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, Dr. Merrill Matthews, Penna, Dexter in studio with us, and we just raised an issue, and during the break I found out everybody's ready to speak to that issue, and that is the fact that this has been a year of census, and so then, of course, because of that, we have to redraw all those districts, and that means, for example, those of you in the state of Texas, which is the primary number of people listening right now, in Austin, they will actually be redrawing everything. It'll be state representative districts, state senate districts, congressional districts. In some cases, the numbers for the Texas House and Senate won't change. There'll still be 31 Texas senators, 150 representatives, but there'll be additional members of Congress, and we'll talk about that. Mm-hmm. And because it is controlled by Republicans, that is going to be good news for Republican office holders. And in some respects, what you see happening in Texas, Dr. Merrill Matthews, is happening in other states, because you had some states a while back, like Pennsylvania, that flipped to Republican. But there was a real push for a while by the Democrats, led by Eric Holder, to try to flip some of these state legislatures, and it went just the other direction, didn't it?
It went just the other direction. It's interesting because the states that were really in question with Donald Trump was Pennsylvania, Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Arizona. And in all 5 of those states, both the House and Senate are controlled by Republicans. Now, 3 of the states they have a Democratic governor, but every one of those states is Republican controlled. Yes. in the state legislature. So one of my arguments is if we think that there were issues in this election, and there certainly were issues, it's time for these Republican state legislatures to act. They may not be able to get past the Democratic governor in a few of those states if the governor's able able to veto it. But it's time for them. If you think there's some issues, Republican state legislatures need to get their act together and clean that thing up between now and the next election.
Yes. Well, let's just speak to our
years.
own state here in Texas. Is a great opportunity right now. We've got a Republican governor and very strong House and Senate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And so but in terms of redistricting and so forth, as they draw these lines, it's amazing. Nearly every state, Minnesota's really the only exception. Alaska, I think they're still trying to determine, but virtually every other state, it's either both the House and Senate is controlled by Democrats or they're controlled by Republicans. Minnesota's the only one. I mean, I find that really interesting.
It is interesting. You know, looking at the way the elections played out and the money that was put into some of these states to try to flip them to Democrat, and they had high hopes.
High hopes.
And they
Including
were very
Texas.
disappointed, including in Texas. And it just didn't work out. And one of the analyses of this by Fred Lucas at Heritage Foundation in the Daily Signal is that the Democrats ran on national issues like defunding police, like Green New Deal type things, whereas the Republicans stuck to state and local issues that, you know, meet people where the rubber meets the road. And, you know, it can be argued that your state legislator has a lot more influence on your life than the president of the United States. So people voted that way, and it's so important not only for the policies but also for the redistricting.
And New Hampshire flipped. It had been controlled. The state legislature was controlled by Democrats. It is now controlled in the House and Senate by Republicans.
Yes. And you only have one, I think the split in Minnesota is where you have one that's Republican, one that's Democrat.
Right.
But in most cases, it's a full slip.
It's a full
flip. It's just amazing to me. You know, you mentioned something in passing, but I thought we need to clean up the elections. And there's a member of Congress here from Texas, that's Brian Babin, and he introduced You Must Be Alive to Vote Act of 2020.
Yes.
It's H.R. 8830. Now it'd have to be reintroduced, but he's kind of the philosophy that no representation without respiration is kind of his argument. And he uses an example of a man by the name of William Bradley who voted for Joe Biden. The trouble is, William Bradley is now theoretically 118 years of age. And so you have entirely too many individuals who are zombie voters. Now, what does he propose? I thought this was very interesting, and that is that, again, we recognize the Constitution gives the states the responsibility to run their elections, but taking a page out of when we had the 55-mile-an-hour speed limit, where they said, okay, yes, you can have any speed limit you want, but if you don't have 55 miles per hour, you won't get transportation funds.
Right.
And everybody came in. This bill ties federal education and transportation funding to a requirement that localities and states compare their voter rolls annually against the Social Security Administration death records and purge any names of people found to be deceased. Now, Dr. Merrill Matthews, you've written about some of the scandals with Medicare and Social Security, but I got to believe the death records for Social Security are a whole lot better than what we have on our voter rolls.
To me, it's surprising that's not already done.
Yes.
Maybe, but they're not great.
No, because you've written a whole book on that, I know.
We saw, I can't remember the last number, but the last audit I saw was several $1 million sent out to Social Security recipients who are either dead or in prison or other things. Social Security is not great on that, so we don't have good records on virtually any of these things.
Yeah, at least it's a step up.
It's
I was
a step
thinking
up, probably,
because I even yesterday when I mentioned it the day before, I said, now Dr. Merrill Matthews will say that again, especially the amount of Medicare fraud and Social Security fraud is really amazing.
And Medicaid now, that's the program for the poor. The government just released its statistics, and that number has gone up significantly to roughly 25% of Medicaid spending. And for our listeners, Medicaid is in many states, used to always be education. In many states, Medicaid is the largest budget now.
Yes.
But roughly 25% is what we call, it's questionable spending. So it may not all be fraud. It may just be somebody doing something that was putting the wrong code or something in there, and maybe an honest mistake. But it's a huge problem in Medicaid since the expansion of Obamacare.
But again, you know how many politicians run against waste and fraud and all the rest. And again, it's a sad commentary that even though we recognize that there is fraud in the Social Security Administration, even requiring that, as Penna said, which you would think would be kind of obvious, would certainly be a vast improvement over our
So
voter
if all
rolls.
kinds of Social Security checks are being sent out to dead people, Is there a penalty if you try to cash that check?
I don't think so. No, if you let it go on for a while, I think there will be a penalty. But the Social Security has had a sort of a pay and chase situation. So if they find a problem there, and people, their argument is usually, well, my husband passed away and I kept getting this check and I thought, hey, this is great. I must still get these things. And what happens if one of them passes away, that the surviving spouse gets the larger of the two, but one of them stops. But Social Security doesn't always catch those things. And so is this an honest mistake or is this fraud and they know they're taking the money and they're keeping it? With fraudulent purposes. So it's hard to go and challenge them on that, but they try to get some of the money back.
With all this investigation taking place right now, we have found that I gave the list the other day of the number of duplicate votes that took place in Nevada, the number of people outside of Nevada have an address that's not in Nevada that voted. And, we've done this for Georgia and Wisconsin. You would think there'd be a way to clean this up, but this is at least one attempt to try to do so. But back to the point you were making, these 5 states you just mentioned a minute ago, the Republican legislature, they really need to pay attention to this, because if anybody's convinced that this was a stolen election, why we're hearing that phrase a lot, aren't we? Then that's something that needs to happen, and I'm sure this is one aspect.
You need a series of best practices. Florida has come out and said we actually have become a model since 2000 when that state was a problem. So we need a best practices out there for the state legislatures to look at and say, we want to try to do this, this, and this. And then, of course, some things you can't control. If the state Supreme Court says, no, we're going to disregard our law and go ahead and allow you to get your votes in, your mail-in votes late or something like that, the state legislature may not be able to stop that. We'll see. But we do need best practices to clean this thing up.
Yeah.
One real fix would be just to severely limit mail-in balloting. I think with this one election has taught us that it's just not good, and it's hard to control, and it's hard to keep it clean. So it needs to not be part of the norm anymore. It needs to go back to being a real, true absentee ballot, where you've got to ask for it.
Yes. Well, again, those are the kind of conversations that were taking place in the Senate on Wednesday, and that's when you had Rand Paul and a couple of others just simply saying, these various lawsuits did not prove there wasn't fraud. It was simply they didn't look at it. They just simply, from a procedural point of view, completely eliminated even looking at that. And so that was something Ken Starr had said, and that's what Rand Paul was saying. And so we'll see whether or not on January 6th, we'll have anybody challenged of what is going to be certified there in Congress.
Yep, that's going to be something. Vice President Mike Pence will oversee that, and then members of Congress and Republicans are trying. The leadership is trying to tap down the effort to do that,
including the Vice President Mike Pence, who said that I'm going to certify the vote, and then he's going on an overseas trip. Right? Did you notice that? So I don't know.
Get out of town.
Get out of town.
Well, when we come back from the break, let's get into some other issues, and we've held it off long enough. We want to get some perspective from Dr. Merrill Matthews about the vaccine. Very good piece. That's our second article, How to End Lockdowns Next Month. And a number of individuals are suggesting maybe we need to focus on the right people. I've seen more than a few editorials saying that this rollout isn't necessarily done in the right way, so we'll get into some of that. Maybe you have some questions about where do you sit on the pecking order for a vaccine. Maybe some of you are thinking, I'm not going to get that vaccine. So we'll get into that conversation right after these important messages.
We all love buy one, get one free, and I've got a deal like that to tell you about. But first, as you listen to the news, do you ever feel like you're living in a different world from some people? The expert on one channel says something totally opposite from the expert on another. Finding the truth usually takes being willing to challenge both sides. It requires discernment, inspired by commitment to God's Word, and a willingness to do your own research. And that describes Kerby Anderson and the team here at Point of View Radio. We are reaching a lot of people in these days of lockdowns and restrictions, and your support reaches even more right now during our $100,000 matching challenge. You invest, and whatever you give is doubled up to $100,000. It's sort of like buy one, get one free. So please give today at pointofview.net/year-end or call 1-800-347-5151. Make a big difference. Pointofview.net/year-end and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition. If you'd like to join the conversation, that number is 1-800-351-1212. We're going to talk about the pandemic, the lockdowns, and the vaccines. Just the other day, we pointed out that Anthony Fauci said, I'm not going to go visit my kids at Christmas. And he and Bill Gates have argued that the lockdowns need to go into maybe the fall of 2022, wherever that comes from. And we even pointed out that they were predicting that all the people going home for Thanksgiving were going to lead to this massive increase in the number of individuals that actually were testing positive. Although there's been an increase, there hasn't been a bump on the increase. But nevertheless, one of the pieces that we've posted, Dr. Merrill Matthews, is how to end lockdowns next month. First of all, let's get into the vaccines themselves, because a lot of people wonder, what's the pecking order? What's the order by which vaccines will be distributed and who?
And it's determined by states. States will make their own decisions. They've had these orders and plans in process for a while. So most of them, they're going to healthcare people first. And first responders, excuse me, I'm sorry, it's allergies today. But first responders are getting those first, and that's already started with the Pfizer vaccine. We'll be seeing Moderna rolling out, I suspect, in the next few days, because the FDA is almost certainly going to approve it, even though the panel has approved it, the FDA has to do it. So that's starting right now, and first responders and very important people, the vice president getting their vaccines right now. So it's a slow rollout. They'll be going to nursing homes. They're already starting to do that in some places. Eventually, I think people above age 65 will be sort of the next on the pecking order as to who will be getting it. And then others will be getting it last. And, of course, the piece that you mentioned in the Wall Street Journal suggests that people who have contracted the disease and have antibodies should be put way down the list.
Is that happening?
I'm not aware that that's happening. And the reason is people with antibodies can still get it, just like the flu. You can have the flu vaccine, or you can have the flu and you can recapture it. Mm-hmm. So I don't expect that will happen, but it's not unreasonable, because most people who have gotten it have antibodies and would either have a milder case if they were to catch it again. But you'd have to test the people for antibodies first and then give them the vaccine. So my guess is that's probably not going to happen in most places.
Wow. Yeah, so the testing, the tests are widespread, but that's sort of an issue. That's hard. That would be hard to test people to see if they, because there's all the asymptomatic people too that don't even know they have it.
This isn't the test for whether you have it; it's the test for antibodies, which is different.
But it could be for even people that didn't ever know they had it. That would be ideal.
Absolutely, yes, because so many people had it, and there's guesstimates as to how many people that is. Some of the estimates come up with, say, 3 to 5 times the number of people who have actually tested positive may have had it and didn't know it.
That's huge.
And it absolutely is huge. It'd be a huge number. And if that were true, there's debates about whether or not it's the case. It means we're approaching herd immunity before too long.
And it means you can save vaccines and spread it down the food chain further more quickly if you could test.
And speaking of saving vaccines, because the Pfizer vaccine is approved for age 16 and above, there were 4 people who voted against approving it. One of them I heard earlier this week, she voted against because she thought it should be 18 and above. She said, I'm absolutely for the vaccine. I just thought it should be 18 above and not 16 and above. But the Moderna is going to be 18 and above. So I went and looked, how many people are we excluding from that right now? And it's nearly 18 and under, is about 25% of the population, nearly 25% of the population. Now, both of them are in trials to approve it for younger people, but they're looking if they need to change the dosage. How do you affect that for younger people? But it's not even approved for them. So you've got 25% of the population that, at least right now, is not allowed to get the vaccine, roughly.
Well, when we talk about targeting, it's actually, that works out very well then for targeting the people that are at most risk.
Right. About 16.5% of the population is over age 65 or older. So that's a fairly small percentage. And if you're looking at that, works out to about 52 million people right now. Not all of them are going to get the vaccine. Not all of them are going to want it. So you're starting with a small part of the population that they're working with, and not all of them are going to take it, and then they'll move down to other areas. So it's I'm more optimistic about this than many people when they have said it's going to be the summer before we have 700 million doses given 2 each. That's 350 million people. Well, we only have the population is about 320 million people. It's not clear to me right now whether or not people I assume people who are here illegally get it anyway. I don't think that's going to be a problem. I haven't heard them discuss that.
Oh, sure.
If the latest polls I've seen, last week it was about 50% said they would get it. I saw one in the last couple of days that said maybe 60% of the population would get it. If you cut that 320 million in half, then now you're looking at maybe 160 million people, maybe 170 million people who will take it. You take the young people out of that, so you're getting down the numbers to where this is. We don't have enough for everybody right off the bat, but I don't think it's going to be as far out as people think. And within the next couple of months, if you've got between January and February, if you have a lot of people vaccinated, people still taking some precautions, I think you're going to see the hospital cases declining significantly. And at that point, you may find even more people saying, it's not really a threat. I'm not going to get it now.
And the bottom line to all of this, of course, and it's sort of the conclusion of this article is that the lockdowns need to end very early next year. They really, truly do, because the damage being done, it's not only economic damage, it's actually damage to people's health. And you start weighing the damage to people's health from the lockdowns against the damage of COVID itself. And as you have more vaccines or just the beginnings of vaccines, the damage to COVID is going to be a lot less. And so that calculation is going to be very obvious.
And I would like to see some states move legislation saying if we're going to go into lockdown, the people who've passed this, if we catch them not locking down, they have to resign immediately and go to jail.
That's a
and
good line.
Put them in a jail with somebody who's tested positive. Because, we've had this just here in the last few days. We had more people come out, mayors and others who have said, we're going to lock these down. You need to be doing this. And then they've been caught themselves not doing it.
Well, again, one of the things we talked about just the other day, because one of my commentaries was actually entitled Breaking Their Own Rules. And I went through the very long list that is, like you said, every day growing longer and longer. Back to the vaccine for just a minute. I thought this was interesting because you say maybe 50%, 60%. What was so striking is the difference in terms of ethnic background, because the survey I saw show that 72% of Asian Americans would get the vaccine. They're the ones that wear the mask. They're the ones that are going to get the vaccine. Then you work down to Anglo-Americans, Hispanic Americans, and I think you can get down to it's almost like 32% of African Americans that say they'll get the vaccine. And, given the fact that sometimes there have been medical experiments done on African Americans,
right.
And maybe
Public
there
Health
are
Service and the Tuskegee experiment.
There you go. You're going right where I was going to go.
The African American community is very distrustful of what was then the Public Health Service. Now we just generally public health issues because they feel like they have a bad track record with regard to the African American community. And I have actually heard people who have established organizations that are doing their best to try to go out and talk to the African Americans, advertise in those areas, try to say they're safe, have celebrities, black celebrities come on and say, I'm going to get the vaccine, you should as well. And there'll still be some who don't want to get it, but you want to have, I trust the vaccine myself. There's going to be side effects. So I will get it as soon as I'm allowed. I will get in line and get it, but not everybody wants to do it. And there will be some reasons. Some are good reasons. Some are not good reasons. But
I think that's something to talk about, too. I'm like a vaccinophobe. But I read about the side effects, and some people have said you need to basically be sick for 3 days or so afterwards. You need to know you're not going to feel well. But, this vaccine has become, this virus has become such a part of our lives, and just hamstrung so much of America that some people like me may open up to getting a vaccine and just, dealing with the side effects because, but what I want to ask you, and we don't have a whole lot of time before the break, is I know this is not a live virus. Neither of these
Right.
are. So should that make people feel better, even though they might get some reactions, but should it make them feel better about safety?
It takes away one concern. However, the reactions are considered to be similar to the Shingrix vaccine, which I've had. That's a 2-dose vaccine as well. Yeah. And I was tired, kind of achy for a couple of days, and little despondent. They're just tired, but after a day or so, I was fine.
Yeah. Let's come back and maybe talk a little bit about that because Tucker Carlson last night, anybody happen to watch that?
I did.
Was talking about the attempt now for everybody to say, oh, there's no problems at all. And so that's not going to be helpful because if you're going to censor any kind of posting about some of the negative effects, then there are going to be people that are getting real skeptical again. So we'll get into that. And we have certainly a lot more to cover. We haven't even gotten into so many other topics on the table, but we will be back right after this.
Election battles have not delayed the rollout of the left's agenda on abortion. Last week, a hearing before a subcommittee of the powerful House Appropriations Committee considered a repeal of the Hyde Amendment. The title of the hearing was The Impact on Women Seeking an Abortion But Are Denied Because of an Inability to Pay. The Hyde Amendment, which has been renewed annually since 1976, protects taxpayers from being required to foot the bill for most abortions. Representative Rosa DeLauro, incoming chair of the House Appropriations Committee, calls the Hyde Amendment discriminatory policy and an issue of racial injustice. Going forward, she does not plan to incorporate it into appropriations bills. Most Americans, even those who support legal abortion, do not think taxpayers should have to pay for it, for poor women or anyone. They don't want the blood of millions of abortion victims on their hands, says Father Frank Pavone, head of Priests for Life. It's estimated that the Hyde Amendment has saved 2.4 million lives, recently about 60,000 per year. As Family Research Council points out, our tax dollars prop up the abortion industry. There's a bill to stop this, the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act. If it ever becomes law, we won't need a Hyde Amendment. Until then, pro-lifers will have to fight hard to protect it. What else does the left have planned to expand access to abortion? They want to reinstate taxpayer funding to groups that promote abortion overseas. This is called the Mexico City policy. With its repeal, Americans will again become the world's top exporter of abortion. The pro-abortion left plans to restore Title X family planning funding to Planned Parenthood and to deny it to pro-life pregnancy centers. They plan to scrutinize and reject pro-life laws states pass. They want to roll back safety standards for chemical abortion drugs. Pro-lifers must remain vigilant and seize every opportunity to pass legislation to block this abortion extremism. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, and then, of course, we'll have the National Hour in about 15 minutes, but I thought while we still have Dr. Merrill Matthews and Penna Dexter here talking about vaccines, I thought I'd raise one other issue, and Tucker Carlson brought it up last night, but I've seen some other people talking about the fact that the people that are going to want to take this vaccine would like to know all of the facts about it, and there is at least his suggestion, and I've seen a few others suggesting the same same thing, that maybe social media, in an effort to really promote the vaccines, are going to obviously want to shut down all of the conspiracy theories about vaccines, which I think maybe is appropriate, but also maybe shut down even the discussion of some of the side effects. And we do have some individuals in the UK, and the story the other day of a woman up in Alaska who had such an allergic reaction they had to race her to the emergency room. Okay. Some people need to know that. First of all, if you are allergic to vaccines or allergic to other kinds of medicines, you might want to think about this. But I think, Penna, we might be a little concerned that if all of a sudden social media, the mainstream media, will shut down any of the side effects of these vaccines, there are going to be a lot of people that are going to once again wonder, is there a conspiracy? Is this something Bill Gates is trying to push through? What about this?
I think that it will actually come back to bite them. It will do more harm than good for their cause of getting people to get vaccinated because as we talked about in the last segment, if you know that a lot of shots that you get, you don't feel well afterwards. So why not just be honest and open about it and let people make that calculation themselves? And really, I think most people, with how horrific and contagious COVID is, most people will weigh probably further on the side of getting a vaccine than on any other sickness because most of us have never seen a pandemic like this, and it's scary. And even though, we're well into it now, you don't, and so people that have had it, some of them have been fine, but some people that have had it, you don't want to go through what they went through. So, I think a lot of people would make that calculation, full knowledge of what they could be facing. Maybe they need to make sure they could take off work a day or two after they get it, just in case they don't feel well.
So let me be a little cynical here. Prior to November 3rd, maybe it was November 10th when they finally said, okay, it looks like Joe Biden's won. My recollection is all these sane people who are now saying this is a safe vaccine, we're not concerned. We think they may be rushing this thing through. Can't trust Donald Trump because he must be in there manipulating everything and forcing them to come. So as soon as we go through the election, all of a sudden, all these people who were raising concerns about whether or not this vaccine is trustworthy, is it being rushed through, maybe not doing the testing it should be doing, all of a sudden this thing is good and safe and so forth. And I think we actually talked about this, Kirby, on the show, that if Joe Biden were to win, all of a sudden this vaccine would be great, and he's the savior who's bringing us this great vaccine that has very little problems.
Yeah, sounds like a commentary that you wrote a while back. It'll be called the Biden vaccine if it turns out to be successful. If there are too many negatives, it'll be called the Trump vaccine. We kind of know how that plays out.
But I do think that, the Bill Gates comments kind of signal the idea that the left will not allow the vaccine to keep us from a lot of these measures. I think that the left will still continue to push masking. Like there's 100 days of masks that Joe Biden has said that, we'll have. That's a long time. And, if this article is correct, and in January or February, we're really ready to open everything up, then we aren't going to need masks in February and March. But, I think it's good to talk about how President Trump did this, and the fact that he did do this, and the fact that they took out a lot of the slack out of the whole system of approval. They did some things simultaneously along the way. So some of these processes that would normally take longer were sped up because the administration placed pressure where pressure was needed. And so if people understand that, they can understand that it's perhaps not going to make it less safe. It's just that they were able to pull out all the stops to get this thing done. It
is amazing how fast they were able to do this. Amazing. Because typically it takes 10 to 12 years to get a drug through from what I call conception to ingestion. This is being done in really a little less than a year. On March the 2nd, that's the day that Andrew Cuomo, as governor of New York, was saying, we don't have a problem in here in New York. We're going to be able to manage this thing. This is going fine. Don't worry about it. Donald Trump had the CEOs of all the major drug companies in the White House, and they were talking about how you're going to get this thing moving. The drug companies that had actually started before that. Yeah. But they were looking at how you're going to get this out and done as quickly as possible. So Trump did not invent the vaccines. He did not manage it in a way, because these were done by private sector companies. Right. But he was all over trying to get this thing moving along and getting money to them to sort of take away any sort of reticence they might have, because they might say we can't spend this much money and end up having it not work or something. They were throwing money at this, and so I would say he takes a lot of credit for getting it done this quickly.
I might just mention you wrote a very good column, and you can go to ipi.org to find that, because you reminded us on that very same day when Andrew Cuomo was waving his hands, maybe the future attorney general, I hear, on saying there was no problem. He was actually meeting with the drug companies. And there's a very good piece, and I believe it was in the Federalist, I didn't post it today, that reminded us of all the disclaimers that were being made back in April, May, June, July, that Donald Trump says that we might have a vaccine by the end of the year, which nobody believes, and all this kind of stuff. And so the same people that have been telling us that we wouldn't have a vaccine by December are now the ones that tell us that we probably won't be able to get rid of lockdown restrictions till 2022. So maybe that tells you something, right?
Yeah, I think it does. I do have a question, buddy, and that is, along this line of ending the lockdowns sooner rather than later, how long, so people will get 2 doses. Are they between 2 weeks between doses?
4 to 6 weeks, I think.
Okay, so that means after 4 weeks, after maybe 2 months, you'll really begin to see how effective it is nationwide.
I think that's right. I think the first one starts the immunity process. The second one sort of creates the strong immunity and preserves it for some time, because you don't want the immunity to be ending in 3 weeks or 5 months or something like that. You want it for long term, which is what they did, as I mentioned, with the Shingrix vaccine. So you want long term protection there. So yes, I think as you'll start seeing, as we start hitting warmer months, some of this will begin to decline. People will have the people who are getting it now are going to be in better shape over the next couple of months. So I think we'll see this. I think we'll see declining numbers pretty soon. And at some point here, probably by mid-spring, late spring, we're going to see people saying it won't be a memory, but much less concerned about it now.
And of course, there's a big question, which we maybe get to in the national hour, as to whether or not everybody should be forced to have a vaccine, or if you want to travel. We're talking right now, will Israel, since we have an Israel trip coming up in June, will that require that you show certification for that, and maybe even wearing a wristband or something like that?
A vaccine passport?
So I don't know. There's just a lot of other issues to address. So nevertheless, let me encourage you to go to our website. The first 2 articles we've been talking about are on the website. Businesses flee to Texas and how to end lockdowns next month. Haven't really gotten into the whole question of if indeed we're going to have a Biden administration. What do those nominees look like? How the media's covered that. We have talked about the issue of China and a number of other topics along the way. So those will certainly be some issues, and what we might face on January 6th, if anything. Of course, we also have a Senate election on January 5th. So we have a lot more to cover there. But if you find yourself saying you'd like to find a few of those articles, those are on the website. Penna Dexter's Viewpoints commentary today on the extreme abortion agenda, what that's going to mean, and those issues are all on our website at pointofview.net. And a little bit later, I'll talk about this more, but we encourage you to consider what you might do before the end of this year to support this ministry. And we now have a $100,000 matching fund. So your gift is doubled. And we'll talk more about that and continue our conversation with Penna Dexter and Dr. Merrill Matthews right after this.
We all love buy one, get one free. And I've got a deal like that to tell you about. But first, as you listen to the news, do you ever feel like you're living in a different world from some people? The expert on one channel says something totally opposite from the expert on another. Finding the truth usually takes being willing to challenge both sides. It requires discernment, inspired by commitment to God's Word, and a willingness to do your own research. And that describes Kerby Anderson and the team here at Point of View Radio. We are reaching a lot of people in these days of lockdowns and restrictions, and your support reaches even more right now during our $100,000 matching challenge. You invest, and whatever you give is doubled up to $100,000. It's sort of like buy one, get one free. So please give today at pointofview.net/year-end or call 1-800-347-5151. Make a big difference. pointofview.net/yearend and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is our weekend edition, and this may be the last weekend edition of this year, because next Friday is Christmas. We're not going to be here, by the way. The Friday after that is New Year's, and we won't be here either, although we are going to do a year end on December 31st. Penna, Dexter in studio with me today, and you and Kelly Shackelford will be joining us for that particular event.
About all the trends of the new year, but boy, this was quite a year.
Yes, so Penna Dexter in studio, as well as Dr. Merrill Matthews, and I'll try to, if I can, give you an overview of all the things we hope we'll try to cover over the next few hours. First of all, there is supposed to be a deal on this $900 billion COVID-19 relief bill. This one comes from National Public Radio. 2 days ago, they were saying they're near the deal. Dr. Merrill Matthews, we're not near the deal yet, are we?
We're 2 days later, and we're still near the deal, but not near enough, apparently, for them to announce anything. And, of course, the government funding runs out this evening at midnight.
Yes, it does.
So,
there we go.
And typically what they've done is, if they're just about to pass something and they're at the weekend, they don't throw in some funding for the next day or so, because if they think we're going to get this done and we're at a weekend, even if the government shuts down, nobody's going to really notice anyway. But we don't know. There was discussion about them trying to run through a quick legislation to keep the government funded for the next 2 days.
Next to 2 days.
Like a patch.
Like a patch.
Emergency funding, as they call it.
That's
anyway.
right. While they still try to come to, and they never seem to be able to get to the deal. I mean, every time I look at it, they say, well, we've got this done, we've got this solved, but now this other issue is coming up. And so they may be moving the goalposts. We just don't know.
Well, anyway, just thought I'd mention that 2 days ago we were talking about a deal that is going to be imminent, and it's still, I guess, imminent.
Not imminent enough.
And again, I do want to get into the pandemic, because our second article we've posted here, How to End Lockdowns Next Month. I do have a picture for those of you looking here, and that is a picture of the Vice President, Mike Pence, getting his shot, as well as a number of members of Congress. But I think some of you have some questions about the vaccine, who would get it, what are the possible side effects, and a few things like that. So Dr. Merrill Matthews will be helping us with that. We also don't want to ignore the fact that it's called the hack of the century, the scope of the Russian hacking. So we might get into that. We also have articles on the media coverage of the Biden nominees, China's triumph, and a number of others. So, Penna, we always have lots to talk about, don't we?
There is a lot to talk about. You know, going back to this package, this relief package, they're talking about $600 per person. They're talking about enhancing unemployment benefits. Some of that is expiring, so they want to renew that, aid to small businesses. But what is absent from this bill, it seems, is aid to states and cities and liability protection for businesses. And there's just been sort of this agreement that this would be tackled later, because it's so contentious. Republicans seem to want their liability protection, and Democrats want the aid to the cities and states, and Republicans say, no way, these are problems that pre-existed COVID. We're not going to throw that into
a real pre-existing condition.
A real pre-existing condition. So the worry is then, okay, if Biden does take office, and then the Congress comes back and passes a huge bill that aids cities and states and all of that. But then there's a mitigating factor that we were talking about during the break, and that is the Congress is becoming so narrowly divided more and more, especially with appointments to the cabinet. And, so Nancy Pelosi's not going to have a lot to work with.
Yeah, right. The person that they've named for Interior, first Native American to be head of the Interior, a female. If she gets that, and she's a Democratic congresswoman, then you've got somebody from New Orleans, I believe it was,
and Cleveland.
And so the what I saw from Politico today is if all of these end up moving in the administration, Nancy Pelosi will have 219 votes. You have to have 218 to control the House. So that gets you down to 2 votes. And that gives people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who has several votes that she might be able to control, it gives them a lot more power, because if you're not going to give us what we want, we're not going to go along with you. If you have 2 votes that can say we're not going to do this, those votes have a lot of power, but it also means Republicans have a lot more power to be able to negotiate with them and swing a deal.
The 117th Congress is going to be actually giving her ulcers, I suspect, because it is going to be the most narrow margin that anybody would have ever expected, certainly in that regard. And okay, let me put my Ebenezer Scrooge hat on for a minute. Why is this deal not coming about? Well, 2 issues. You mentioned one. Why should we be spending so-called COVID relief money to states that have not managed their finances? But if I can be now Rand Paul for another point, why are we borrowing money from China or other countries to then pay people that never have lost their jobs? So these are, really, I think, relevant sticking points, aren't they?
They are, and we don't know where they're going to come down on this. The liability protection, Republicans have been working for that for some time, and apparently that's been set aside along with the state and local funding, though apparently school funding will still be in this.
Yes.
There's a widespread thinking that the difference is that Republicans want to call this a relief package. People who have lost their job through no fault of their own because their mayors or their governors or their county commissioners are shutting down their businesses. So we're going to give you some funding there. Democrats want to call this a stimulus. So we'll throw a lot of money at that and hope that people will spend that money, and that will stimulate the economy. But as we've talked about, in some ways the economy is doing okay. I mean, you've got some rising unemployment, or at least people filing jobless claims and so forth over the last few months. But the economy is not actually doing all that badly, given how bad it's been shaken by this.
Yes. Again, you find different reactions when we say that. Sometimes I look down and the phones will ring up and people say, well, I'm doing poorly right now because I don't have a job.
Right.
So it's doing this. Some are doing pretty well and then others are doing poorly. But again, you want to help those that need it. And this has been the big sticking point, at least for some of the Republicans. And I just mentioned Rand Paul, but he's been on the programs talking about why give money to individuals that still have their job and haven't lost their job.
In the financial crisis, the higher income people, the upper middle income people got hurt the most. Lower income people may have gotten hurt some, but they all often kept their jobs. This is just the reverse. Many service people working for restaurants and bars and other things, lower income, are getting hurt badly by this, whereas higher income people who are able to work at home have done okay.
Well, we're going to take a break, and we will get to the issue of hacking later, because we do want to have at least a little grief sent towards Russia, because the rest of the time we're going to have a lot of grief going towards China. So we will get into that. But I thought, since we're talking about this idea of the COVID package, a lot of people are just wondering, what does the future look like with the vaccines? And the second article we have posted here is one on how to end lockdowns next month, because there are others like the eminent Dr. Anthony Fauci and even Bill Gates and Melinda Gates the other day were out there talking about these lockdown restrictions are going to have to continue at least through the fall of 2021, maybe even to the winter of 2022. I can look at across the table here that there are people rolling their eyes, and I think it gets back to what can we expect from this vaccine. Dr. Merrill Matthews can give us some numbers on who gets the vaccine, what the ages are, what the phases are, so we'll try to help you understand all of that right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, our world has changed significantly since the November election, and that raises the reasonable question of whether we've been played. Victor Davis Hanson provides a few examples in a recent commentary, and I will add some others. For example, perhaps you have noticed the disappearance of all the protest. Where is Antifa and BLM? A week or two before the election, the flood of violence in cities subsided, perhaps for fear that it might affect the election. Has systemic racism and excessive force by police just disappeared? What about all the concerns about the coronavirus? Not so long ago, Andrew Cuomo, Joe Biden, and Kamala Harris expressed their concerns about the Trump vaccine. Now it seems like it'll be successful. They might even decide to call it the Biden vaccine. And isn't it interesting that Pfizer only announced their progress on the vaccine after the election? In fact, this summer, executives at the company did not update the president or the media about their progress. They only contacted the Biden campaign. 3 months ago, we were hearing from Democratic leaders that it was dangerous to send kids back to school. That's why we had to shut down the schools and reject the calls from the president and the Secretary of Education to get students back in the classroom. Now it's time for the kids to go back to school. You know, 4 years ago, many Democratic leaders and the media suspected that voting machines might have been hacked. Even last year, you had Senator Elizabeth Warren concerned about unsecured computer systems and ambiguous rules about matching signatures on ballots. Now they argue the electoral system is perfect. Any claims of fraud are either insignificant or non-existent. Yes, so much has changed in the last few weeks, and it is tempting to think that all of us have been played. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again in studio with us today, Penna Dexter, Dr. Merrill Matthews, and we looking kind of Christmassy. Penna's in red, and we have a Christmas tree here, so if you happen to be watching online, you can see some of that. But our second article, How to End Lockdowns Next Month. It was a piece in the Wall Street Journal. I thought it would just be helpful to understand the wide variation here between some that are saying, oh, we'll be in lockdowns in the fall of 2021, which is hard to even get my head around, and then others that are saying, like these individuals at Stanford, that are saying, no, if we use a little bit of intelligence here, one's at Stanford, one's at Oxford, to be fair, then we could probably end the lockdowns next month. What'd you find? These two
physicians, doctors who wrote this piece, and they're really the authors of the Great Barrington Declaration, if people have seen that. They also wrote it with a Harvard Medical School a professor, and their idea is focused protection. So people who face a high risk should get the vaccine first. And I mean, we've seen that already, but this is even more focused, I think, on that. So first of all, you go to the nursing home. Well, you go to the medical workers, but then you go to the nursing homes and people with chronic conditions. And you have to remember, I think, and this is something they're very good at pointing out, and that is lockdowns are deadly too. So you have to begin to balance the deadliness of the lockdowns with the deadliness of the virus. And as this vaccine starts to take hold, the lockdowns are going to show themselves to be more deadly. That's really what they're contending. And they really make a good case in this piece, and it's available at pointofview.net, and we'll unpack it further. But that the lockdowns could actually end very early next year, like maybe, well, they say next month.
Yeah, and they're doing this because they want to go to the vulnerable populations, but they suggest vaccinating those who have contracted the disease and now have the antibodies. They go way down the list because the antibodies probably provide some immunities for them anyway. I mean, I think Donald Trump at one point said, I'm immune because I've had it. And you're not immune, but you probably are able to, if you were to be infected again, you probably are really fine. You might have some mild symptoms or something of that nature. So they're saying they've got antibodies and the whole purpose of the vaccine is to create antibodies, so you can fight it. So their suggestion is if you've had it, put them down, a ways on the list, and that makes a certain amount of sense. So you're targeting the most vulnerable first and the least likely to be damaged by it, which would be younger people and people who've contracted the disease, put them towards the end.
Let's talk about younger people, because I think most people are not aware of the fact that young people will not be able to get the vaccine because we're still going through clinical trials, right?
Not for a while. So what the FDA has approved is for the Pfizer vaccine for those 16 and older, not under that, and for Moderna for 18 and older, and not under that. So they're still in the trial phase for teenagers and young people. And that may be a few months before we know what that's going to be. So they're trying to target so that's nearly 25% of the population. If you're talking about 18 and under, that's nearly 25% of the population. So set them on hold. They don't get it until later on anyway. The senior population, 65 and older, 16.5% of the population. That's about 52 million, according to Kaiser Family Foundation's assessment of this. So those are the ones we're really, after you get through the essential workers, healthcare workers, and so forth, they're looking at people in nursing homes. Then you're going to go to the senior population, and that's a fairly small percentage of the population. It's not huge, so we're targeting them, but you get past them, and then once you get into the Middle Ages, people are, again, less likely to be damaged by it. And so it works out. I think it makes perfect sense what most of the states are doing in their approaches.
You know, when you look at COVID and the reaction to it, you find, of course, that the states that are led by conservatives are less likely to do severe lockdowns, less likely to require, masking when you're going for a run outside and things like that. And I think another part of this is just the idea of resuming normal life. I mean, you hear Bill Gates talking about how long lockdowns should be, how long masking and protection should be. I mean, I have no confidence in Joe Biden that he's going to be wanting to, encourage the opening up of various states anytime soon. But yet you have governors in states that are more conservative, business friendly, who want to resume normal life. And I think that because the states are in control of lockdowns, that you will see a normal life in many states, but you'll still see states that are, look like they look now, which is pretty sad for the citizens in those states.
What about the people that will or will not get the vaccine? I thought I might as well walk into that landmine field and blow it up a little bit, because we've talked on this program before that, for example, Asian Americans, 72% said they would take the vaccine. You get in the African American population, around 32%, and then Hispanic American, Anglo American kind of fit in between. So you get a real variation. You got about 50%, almost 60% that say they might take the vaccine. But are you going to have states that are going to make it mandatory, or we're going to have a vaccine passport? What do you think is even a possibility in that regard?
It would not surprise me at all if many or all states require, once it's available for children, require them to be vaccinated, as they do in many other states, as states do for being able to go to public school. So many of them require certain vaccines, measles and mumps and so forth. And it wouldn't surprise me if they do that. Some blue states might try to mandate the vaccine. Maybe they'll be able to do it, but I suspect there'll be some pushback from people as well. The federal government does not. It's not clear from the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court decided years and years ago that states have a certain amount of authority to be able to mandate vaccines, especially for children. It's not clear that they have the authority to be able to do it for adults, and it's clearly not sure. We're not sure that the federal government has the ability to be able to do that. So, I think what we'll see is that an awful lot of people will take the vaccine. Then we'll see the decline in the virus, assuming there's no mutations that end up. We sort of get a reattack from a slightly different coronavirus. But if that's the case, I suspect we'll see the vast majority of people. I think we'll see something like half to a slight majority take the vaccine, and when you have people with that have immunities already, that we'll see the cases declining significantly so that hospitals can easily manage them. And at that point, I think you'll see states backing off and opening up again.
Well, so you're thinking early next year, like this article says?
I think early next year. I think by February or March, we will start seeing enough responses from the vaccine and others that you'll see cases declining and states saying we can open back up. Because remember, the justification for the lockdown is the hospitals are being overwhelmed.
Right.
If the hospitals are not being overwhelmed, if they can handle the cases that are coming through, then it's like the flu. I mean, we don't like this being spread, but if you can handle it both with vaccinations and with treatments, and the treatments are getting much better out there, then I think you'll see the lockdowns begin to dissolve.
I was going to raise the old question about any kind of secondary effects, allergic reactions, those kinds of things. What about that? Because one of the concerns I want to put on the table, and Tucker Carlson talked about it last night, is you almost get this push now from social media saying we're not going to allow any kind of negative statements about vaccines, and there are some conspiracy theories out there a little bit bizarre, but in some respects, people are getting allergic reactions. We've already talked about that. And when you have the social media and maybe even the mainstream media want to close all that down, I think a lot of people are going to be even more fearful about getting the vaccine. What about this?
Virtually every medicine has side effects. Yes. Some of them are very mild. Most of them you don't. If you take an aspirin, you might not notice anything unless you take too many of them. So that's the case, and everybody has to sort of judge their risk, and they want to try to mitigate the risk and so forth. So vaccines have reactions as well, have side effects, and if you are susceptible to some of those, with flu vaccine, they say, are you allergic to eggs and so forth? Typically, vaccines are done in eggs. The coronavirus and the Pfizer and Moderna are not done that way. So if you have a certain type of allergic reactions to things, they'll want you to stay out of this or be aware that this could be a problem. So yes, there are going to be reactions, and reactions we don't know. When you go from a population of say 30,000 that you've tested on to millions and millions, you're going to find some cases that you weren't aware of that are going to have a reaction to it. Just the case. My argument is that those risks are really, really small, but the risk of getting the virus and actually having severe symptoms from it it's not large, but it's much larger than the reaction to the vaccine.
Let's take a break, and we'll come back and maybe take some of your phone calls, too, 1-800-351-1212, and get into some of the other aspects of this as we move on to some other topics. And as we go to a break, let me just mention that between now and year end, we do want you to consider what you might do to support this ministry. And as I announced yesterday, we have a $100,000 matching fund. So if you find yourself saying, I'm hearing all sorts of things on Point of View that I don't hear anywhere else, maybe you might consider leaving a gift to us. And you can go to the website, pointofview.net, click on that banner, and we'll talk more about that right after this.
We all love buy one, get one free. And I've got a deal like that to tell you about. But first, as you listen to the news, do you ever feel like you're living in a different world from some people? The expert on one channel says something totally opposite from the expert on another. Finding the truth usually takes being willing to challenge both sides. It requires discernment, inspired by commitment to God's Word, and a willingness to do your own research. And that describes Kerby Anderson and the team here at Point of View Radio. We are reaching a lot of people in these days of lockdowns and restrictions, and your support reaches even more right now during our $100,000 matching challenge. You invest, and whatever you give is doubled up to $100,000. It's sort of like buy one, get one free. So please give today at pointofview.net/year-end or call 1-800-347-5151. Make a big difference. pointofview.net/yearend and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Stay on vaccines a little bit longer since we have Dr. Merrill Matthews here, Penna Dexter. We'll get into some other issues, and if you find yourself saying, well, I'd like to read some more about that, there are some great materials that we have posted on the website. And I might just mention my commentary today is based on a piece by Victor Davis Hanson, where I actually, after reading his piece, said, sometimes you feel like we've been played, and I'll just read the 2 paragraphs in the middle, because I said, what about all the concerns about the coronavirus vaccines? Not so long ago, Andrew Cuomo, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris expressed their concern about the Trump vaccine. Now that it's successful, I haven't heard anything about it. Maybe they'll even call it the Biden vaccine. And I said, isn't it interesting that Pfizer only announced their progress on the vaccine after the election, but during the summer, the executives did not update the president, did not update the media. They did contact the Biden campaign.
Amazing.
And so anyway, that's my commentary today. Penna's commentary is up there as well. And it just makes you wonder, after the election, all sorts of things have changed, haven't they?
Didn't Kamala Harris say in the debate, the vice presidential debate, that it would be the Trump vaccine and she would be very wary of it?
And now all of a sudden it's changing, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Your commentary the other day said they would call it the Biden vaccine.
You could see that on November the 3rd when the attitude changed. And that's right. They went on for months saying, we're not sure we can trust these vaccines. Are the companies rushing it? Are they bypassing certain protocols? Are they overlooking the FDA and other things of that nature? And now that's come across, and they're saying, "Oh no, this is good. This is great. We're gonna solve all our problems with this great vaccine that's coming out now." And of course, we actually have several vaccines, and we may actually find at some point that some of them work better than others.
Yes,
some of them may work better in different populations, older populations or younger populations than others. So we still got a learning phase on this, but the media are all about how great things are now with the new vaccine out. And can't we get these out there and get people vaccinated, even in creating education campaigns to try to get people to be aware of it and get in line?
I just fear that maybe they'll be wanting to shut down even concerns about any kind of side effects and things like that. But let me go to some phone calls, because some of you have some questions and some comments, which they all look very appropriate. So Brandon in Texas, I think you want to talk about these vaccines, the so-called mRNA vaccines. Go for it.
Yes, sir. So as far as the mRNA vaccines go, mRNA vaccines is it's not necessarily a new technology, but it's the first time that it's been used in humans, starting with the clinical trials. So to administer this, some 2.9 billion doses, is to say that the side effects are far less than the potential, or even remotely less than the potential effects that the virus itself will have on a human being. We're not actually completely aware of that yet. That is anecdotal at best, because if you take the amount of people, let's just say Bell's palsy, for example. So they had 4 cases of Bell's palsy within the 20,000 or 35,000, I believe it was, for the Pfizer trials. So that's 4 cases of Bell's palsy. Now, it's considered statistically relatively, it's not necessarily uncommon, but 1 in 10,000 people will develop Bell's palsy. They don't know why. Still to this day, science can't figure out what exactly causes it. Now, a lot of these are temporary. There are 4 cases. Now, 1 in 10,000 is normal. Now, it had 4 in 20,000. That's double the amount of cases, and that was in the vaccine group. That was not in the placebo group. That is and that they are saying that's not enough to be causal. Well, if that's not enough to be causal, what is?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not even in the placebo group. It's in the 20,000. It's double what the actual population base is. So if you take those statistics. So whenever a doctor or whenever the FDA panel, which, by the way, Dr. Scott Gottlieb, who was the ex-FDA chief, is on the board of Pfizer, you have to start asking very common. I mean, it's not even a conspiratorial question. It's a real question. Is the stock price getting in the way of the safety? And it is. I think that's throughout history. I mean, that's just been the case. If we look at many vaccines throughout history, only the polio vaccine he gave away for free because he saw, the good it could do. So that's all I wanted to say, is that I think that this has not been given enough time, and I don't think that's necessarily a coincidence, because money, profit, whenever you're in, that's just what it's about, unfortunately. I mean, you could say that it's about a few other things as well that, get kind of move out of the economy and the other places of conversation. But for whatever reason, people are lining up to get this. And I understand the elderly. I understand the more at-risk groups doing that. Whenever those are your two choices, potentially die or get this vaccine. But like y'all were saying, the younger groups, the healthier groups, I don't see a reason to get this.
Good point.
I'm 31.
Yeah. Well, I think you've brought some great points to the conversation. And Dr. Merrill Matthews, some thoughts?
Yes, Brandon. When you go from 1 to 2, even though that is a doubling, it's not a big doubling. Because like if I have 1 penny and I've got 2 pennies, even though my money's doubled, I don't necessarily have a whole lot more. But you're right. If you when they expand this out to the population, we're going to find probably some more cases. This happens with all of them, and that's why the drug companies oftentimes do what we call phase 4 trials, which is post-release trials where they've got more people out there. They're able to take a little more time because they did this in you're right that they had the technology that they were working on. The technology goes back to the 90s. In the early 2000s, when they had the SARS virus, they started trying to develop this even more. So they've been working on this for some time. Those who really liked it were taking a lot of heat because so many people thought this was just not going to be an effective way of doing it. But they had basically the technology, which is why they were able to get this out and going so quickly. We don't know the long-term effects on this. That's an absolutely fair question. We just don't know the long-term effects. And there are side effects with all vaccines. I don't think the profit element here is Moderna's stock actually went down over this past week, went down 5%. Johnson & Johnson and a few other companies are doing this free of charge, and they're also having a lot of countries, India and China, which especially India, which tends to make a lot of drugs on the cheap because they are able to do it. They're able to, in some cases, bypass the patents and intellectual property. The drug companies have got a lot of eyes on them. They know if they make a lot of money on this, it's going to go hard for them. Their stock may go up, but that doesn't necessarily mean they are making a lot of money from it. So, in this case, I'm going to trust the drug companies.
Well, the article that we put up about ending the lockdowns and the Great Barrington Declaration, the point is kind of what Brandon was recommending anyway, and that is targeting the vaccine to the vulnerable, the elderly and nursing homes first, after you've done healthcare workers, and then working down to elderly. And, it's not even possible to vaccinate children right now. And people in his age group, which he said he's 31, would be very low down. And, they could possibly make that calculation for themselves, too. But the people in the danger groups, to vaccinate them will have a bigger effect and could begin to end this thing a lot quicker than, a lot of people are saying. And so I don't know that, his recommendation, Brandon's, is that far off from what's being recommended here. It's the idea is to target and also to say that if you've had the virus, perhaps you're going to go down lower on the list and not get the vaccine, at least not now.
And if you the highest death rates have been among seniors.
Right.
If you get them vaccinated, let's say people of 50 and above, if most of them get vaccinated, you're going to see the death rate drop dramatically, and the ICUs and other things drop dramatically. Young people in Brandon's age can still get it, can still die from it, but those are very, very small numbers. So if you get that and you take the political pressure off everybody to say we've got to do something because so many deaths and so forth, then I think we get back to a way where we can actually reasonably ask some of these questions.
Yes. Well, we're going to take a break, and we'll take another phone call on maybe vaccinations and their nursing homes, and then we'll get into some of these other issues because, of course, we have hacking, which has been done some somehow through maybe the Russian premier intelligence agencies, some people are suggesting, and the hack of the century, then China's horrific triumph. We've been talking about some of that with some of the posting of material that came from John Radcliffe, who's the head of national security and national intelligence, I should say, and also Gordon Chang and some others. And I noticed some people want to talk also about the Pentagon hasn't allowed Biden's cabinet from getting access to certain intelligence info. So we'll talk about that. And we have a lot to cover. And I'm glad we have another hour after this, because we are only starting to get into some of the issues that are going to be front and center. So stay tuned. We'll get to those questions and comments right after these important messages.
Election battles have not delayed the rollout of the left's agenda on abortion. Last week, a hearing before a subcommittee of the powerful House Appropriations Committee considered a repeal of the Hyde Amendment. The title of the hearing was "The Impact on Women Seeking an Abortion But Are Denied Because of an Inability to Pay." The Hyde Amendment, which has been renewed annually since 1976, protects taxpayers from being required to foot the bill for most abortions. Representative Rosa DeLauro, incoming chair of the House Appropriations Committee, calls the Hyde Amendment discriminatory policy and an issue of racial injustice. Going forward, she does not plan to incorporate it into appropriations bills. Most Americans, even those who support legal abortion, do not think taxpayers should have to pay for it, for poor women or anyone. They don't want the blood of millions of abortion victims on their hands, says Father Frank Pavone, head of Priests for Life. It's estimated that the Hyde Amendment has saved 2.4 million lives, recently about 60,000 per year. As Family Research Council points out, our tax dollars prop up the abortion industry. There's a bill to stop this, the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act. If it ever becomes law, we won't need a Hyde Amendment. Until then, pro-lifers will have to fight hard to protect it. What else does the left have planned to expand access to abortion? They want to reinstate taxpayer funding to groups that promote abortion overseas. This is called the Mexico City policy. With its repeal, Americans will again become the world's top exporter of abortion. The pro-abortion left plans to restore Title X family planning funding to Planned Parenthood and to deny it to pro-life pregnancy centers. They plan to scrutinize and reject pro-life laws states pass. They want to roll back safety standards for chemical abortion drugs. Pro-lifers must remain vigilant and seize every opportunity to pass legislation to block this abortion extremism. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Dr. Merrill Matthews. Let's go out to Missouri, KTTK. And Christine, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View. I think you have a question.
Yes, I do. First, I just wanted to say, so mainstream scientists have been dead wrong time and again ever since President George Washington was essentially killed by his doctor who believed in bloodletting. So I've heard that they haven't tested these vaccines on many old people. They essentially tested them on very healthy individuals. And so now my question is, if they're about to make these vaccinations mandatory for the elderly in nursing homes, how far are we in this country from having to get mandatorily vaccinated across the board? I mean, we already force our young children to take nearly 70 shots. They didn't line up for that. They didn't sign up for that, and they didn't sign up for the autism and the cancer they got consequently. But now, what about everyone in the world? I mean, we trust this medical machine so much, but if you follow the money, honey, you'll find the corruption. So I'm just wanting to ask, how far are we from losing all of our rights? Dissolving Illusions, the disease, the vaccines, and the forgotten history by Suzanne Humphreys, MD, and Roman Bistriank highlight how not even the polio vaccine actually stopped polio. Polio rates were already declining en masse. And the reason for polio in the first place was the poor living conditions and all these other sicknesses that we think we were taught were eradicated by vaccinations. They were actually not eradicated by vaccinations, but by better living conditions. And then actually taking a look at the history, you can see that they renamed all these things they used to call polio because they didn't want it to be shown that the polio vaccine didn't work.
The conversation here. I mean, really, the question is, what about this vaccine?
Yeah, and Christine, I think you implied that they were mandating it for nursing homes. They are not mandating it. There's no mandate out there for nursing homes to get this. So if it goes to a nursing home, and I suspect this will vary by state and by nursing home, but if you're nursing home and you still have hold of your faculty. I mean, you're still able to make decisions. You will be asked to do that, and they may encourage you to do it, but I don't know that they will mandate it for you. If you're in a nursing home where you no longer really have control of your facility, your faculties, and you have somebody who makes medical decisions for you, either through a durable power of attorney for health care or so forth, that person would make that decision. In some cases, you have people who don't have that, and the nursing home there may make their own decision on it. So my guess is they're not going to the nursing homes. I would suspect among some businesses they may try to mandate that, especially if they're among people in the public. But that's primarily to protect them from liability out there, which we can't seem to get a liability provision in the bill. So I don't know that they're going to mandate that. But if with medical conditions, if you're not able to make sound decisions, the nursing home or your relatives may make those decisions for you.
I think I don't think there'll be federal pressure or even state pressure right off the bat. It may come later, depending on how well it's eradicated or controlled. But I do think that you'll get pressure. You get pressure from your job, your workplace. Mm-hmm. If you have a certain kind of workplace,
if you're a
may
waitress
lose
in a
your job
or
if you won't
something
get
like
it.
that.
Yeah, there'll be things like that. And I think you mentioned earlier that probably schools, they mandate so many vaccines. I've fought many battles about vaccines over the years with kids because, the schools, it's because, they're making a numbers calculation and they're trying to protect the public. So everybody has to make their individual decision, though. And I do think for freedom's sake, we do have to protect our rights to make those decisions.
And I agree with that. So it would not surprise me if some businesses, as we suggest, might try to mandate that, especially given some exceptions for people who have medical conditions or something of that nature. If the Democrats would relent and let certain types of business liability, so that if I have a business and I'm following all the CDC guidelines and doing it appropriately, then I am somehow or other immune, unless there's gross negligence out there, then I'm immune from liability. I think you would find a lot of companies would say we're going to encourage it but not mandate it. But if they don't have that liability, you can't always tell where this comes from, where I got it. Right. And so that's a trial lawyer bonanza.
Well, let's talk about that for just a minute. Since we kind of got into that area, you would think that we would want to provide some kind of protection of liability because, as we mentioned, and this is months ago, this was a family suing Walmart because he was a Walmart greeter, and they were arguing that he got COVID-19 and died from it, and it's a sad story. But did he get it because he was there as a greeter at Walmart, or did he get it somewhere else? And that's always going to be the difficulty of trying to prove that. But on the other hand, you can imagine Walmart probably has the financial resources to address that. But just think of a typical small business, and if you can't provide some some kind of protection, then even if it was a nuisance lawsuit, could just completely drive you out of business. And so you'd say, well, certainly want to provide some protection, but again, trial lawyers give a lot of money, for example, to the Democratic Party. You know, we've been talking about following the money. Okay, let's follow the money in that regard. And maybe that's one of the reasons why when we talk about this COVID relief bill, we can't seem to get that part into the bill.
And they apparently pulled that out along with, and the Democrats want funding to the state and local governments. That's being pulled out. And the liability, which Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, has been pushing for some time. And he's just not budged on that. So they can't come to a conclusion. They're pulling it back. If that's the case, then it would not surprise me to see stronger efforts among governments and businesses and schools to try to make sure people are vaccinated, because they don't want to be subject to the liability.
You know, one of the things I want to look ahead to is if indeed we have a President Joe Biden, and it hasn't been certified, and it won't be till January 6th, and who knows what happens there, but most likely people are starting to assume that he would be there. Penna, you mentioned just a minute ago this future administration, based on the few comments by Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and a few of those that he's tapping in the cabinet, suggests they want to keep lockdowns for a long period of time. And I don't think they would necessarily be against trying to have mandated vaccines, which is what Christine's talking about here.
Well, the left is, they sort of lean toward liking to control things. I think the coronavirus, this whole situation has been helpful to the left with some of their agenda items. They've been able to maintain control over people. They've been able to keep people sort of locked in. They've been able to curtail freedom, let's put it that way. And with schools, their teachers unions have, gotten their sway many times with closing schools. And there's just, I don't know whether even a vaccine is going to stop some of the folks that like the lockdowns, that like the masking, that like all of these elements of control. So they're going to give it up. They're going to be reticent to, I think, give it up. But that's another method of control, though, is to require a vaccine in order to do things. And many are just bent that way. That's their, it's just our country is divided philosophically, faith-wise, in so many ways. And so, you've got freedom lovers and you've got those who love control, and they think it's efficient and they think it works better.
Let's take a break, and let me just mention once again that we are encouraging you to consider what you might do to support this ministry. And again, we're trying to provide news, information, commentary maybe you don't hear in other places. And if you appreciate that, I would hope that you would visit the website, pointofview.net, find some of the articles, including some we'll be getting to in the next hour in terms of Russia and China and a number of other things. And if you do so, of course, as I've mentioned, we have a matching fund. So your gift of $100 becomes $200. A gift of $500 becomes $1,000. And so visit our website, pointofview.net. We'll be back right after this.
We all love buy one, get one free. And I've got a deal like that to tell you about. But first, as you listen to the news, do you ever feel like you're living in a different world from some people? The expert on one channel says something totally opposite from the expert on another. Finding the truth usually takes being willing to challenge both sides. It requires discernment, inspired by commitment to God's Word, and a willingness to do your own research. And that describes Kerby Anderson and the team here at Point of View Radio. We are reaching a lot of people in these days of lockdowns and restrictions, and your support reaches even more right now during our $100,000 matching challenge. You invest, and whatever you give is doubled up to $100,000. It's sort of like buy one, get one free. So please give today at pointofview.net/year-end or call 1-800-347-5151. Make a big difference. Pointofview.net/year-end and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition, Penna, Dexter, Dr. Merrill Matthews with us, and we want to not only be talking about, as we have, the threat of COVID-19, but a bigger set of threats, and that comes from China and Russia. Just the other day, we talked about the fact that the Director of National Intelligence, John Ratcliffe, who was originally an individual who represented the 4th Congressional District in Texas, actually said that he has access to more intelligence than any member of the United States government, other than the president. And he said, if I could just communicate one thing to the American people from this unique vantage point, it is that the People's Republic of China poses the greatest threat to America today and the greatest threat to democracy and freedom worldwide since World War II. So we are going to spend some time talking about China and Russia because of this hacking. And certainly those are some issues related. And I know one of our callers wants to talk about what's going on right now in the Pentagon. Let me take that phone call real quickly because it kind of starts us in that way. Some of you want to talk about the vaccine. We'll take those calls. But let's head to South Carolina. You've been waiting for a while. WAPG Forrest, what would you like to add to the conversation today?
Yes, sir. Glad to hear you, Kerby. Listen to you every day, Bo.
Well, thank you.
Yes, I've seen a post this morning that was issued out by the Pentagon, and then I seen the same post just before I got off of work, which the Pentagon is barring the Biden team from any intelligence from the Pentagon. And I was curious if any of your guys have heard any of this yet.
I have heard the same thing. Yes.
And I have not heard that. I thought he was getting the National Intelligence Briefing. And are they excluding the Chinese aspect of it?
I think that's what's going on. I think it has to do with the Pentagon. It's not that individuals aren't getting some briefing. That is, the so-called President-elect Joe Biden is getting the same kind of intelligence briefing that the president has. As a matter of fact, that is produced by John Ratcliffe, and that's one of the things he does. He provides not only the assessment every day, but the actual national assessment that goes to the president. But the Pentagon has limited that. And I won't speculate too much, but I guess I'll crawl out on a limb and suggest maybe it gets back to what Dr. Merrill Matthews said. China. The connection between Joe Biden and China and Hunter Biden and China is enough for, I think, there to be pause around the, at least the E-circle of the Pentagon, wondering whether or not we really want to be sharing all that right now with Joe Biden.
Yeah, well, what about if he's actually becomes the president?
There you go.
What do you do then?
Yes. Well, then you have access to it.
And that becomes a big issue because, of course, if Republicans keep the Senate, Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin produced in September his committee a report on Hunter Biden and his many connections, and I've gone through it. In fact, I had Senator Johnson on last time I was sitting in your chair.
That's right.
And
thank you for doing
it's
that.
a very interesting study where they're report where they're looking at just the connections of money here, there, and yonder. You know, we've had some other people on the show today talk about follow the money. It's interesting to me that the media And I hear from the media all the time. I'd hear it from them when they were looking at Donald Trump and maybe some of his properties and so forth. They would say, follow the money, follow the money. They are not interested in following the money with Hunter Biden. And I find that really interesting. Story today out about a connection is whether or not Joe Biden was actually being alluded to in some of the emails that were going on back and forth. And but Hunter Biden made a lot of money.
Yes, he did.
And there were allegations that he was going to be sharing some of that money with Joe Biden. I don't know if he did. But even some of the other family members, Joe Biden's brothers, have made a lot of money.
Yes. James Biden has made quite a bit, and he's mentioned. And there are investigations in 3 different states, Delaware, Pennsylvania, whatever, I can't even remember. There are some questions about the connections. And this comes from China, which again gets into one of our articles, China's Horrific Triumph, or the piece the other day by John Ratcliffe that points out that just the intellectual property theft alone, $500 billion a year, and they want to really dominate the world economically, militarily, and technologically. We've got to recognize that the number one challenge and threat is China, even though news today is about a Russian hack, which is no small issue either. But we have some enemies out there, and we have some people that may be coming into the Oval Office and the Pentagon that don't act like that.
That's right. You know, we've seen already the reports of the Hunter Biden emails where you see reference to keys to an office.
Yes.
With for Joe Biden himself and Jill Biden and a Chinese operative. And you have to remember, everyone's part of the Communist Party in China. So, you know, there's no separation. So you have the emails, and you have this one partner, Tony Bobolinsky, talking about Joe Biden being at meetings when he denied knowing anything about his son's activities with China, but actually being at meetings. Other emails talking about monies transferred to Joe Biden. So I understand why the National Security and the Pentagon are reticent to open things up. And I do wonder what's going to happen once he actually, if he does take office.
And remember with Donald Trump, the concern about the Russia collusion hoax was that Russia might have some dirt on Donald Trump and use that as blackmail. Well, China might have some for Hunter Biden and Joe Biden. I have no idea if it does, but they might, and they could conceivably use that as blackmail if they do have it in certain areas. So it's you want to be careful about that. And if Joe Biden is a funnel of information to Hunter Biden, and Hunter Biden still has these connections, you just have to be careful.
Well, I mean, the blackmail could have already happened because the amounts of money that we're talking about that's gone to the Biden family already would influence them. It would influence policy. So the blackmail already exists. It's not like if, so they're already predisposed to certain policies toward China. And the confrontation that Donald Trump has done throughout his presidency has actually improved things for a lot of Americans. And so it's sad.
Remember the Clinton Foundation, Clinton Family Foundation, and that was pay to play. I mean, is there something similar to that with the Biden family? Maybe they don't have a foundation, but it seems like some of the same concerns.
Right. And then once Hillary Clinton lost, the money coming into the foundation dropped off significantly. Yeah. Nobody wanted to pay Bill Clinton $500,000 for a speech. So things changed dramatically.
Well, again, I appreciate you bringing that up. And, Forrest, we're going to follow that because I did hear about that today. I've had some people speculating. I got a feeling we'll find out a little bit more about some of this as well. And the 4th article on the website here is by Conrad Black. And maybe when we come back from the break, we'll mention it just real quickly because it helps us understand. This is called China's Horrific Triumph. And China has made it very clear militarily and technologically using all sorts of cyber capabilities. As a matter of fact, when I first heard of this hack, I said, is Russia being blamed for what China's trying to do? No, it looks like Russia was doing it this time. And then maybe after the break, we can talk about, does it make sense to have somebody on the House Intelligence Committee who actually was involved in what was called, I think, a honeypot method of connection to China? Does that make any sense? So we'll get into those conversations right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, our world has changed significantly since the November election, and that raises the reasonable question of whether we've been played. Victor Davis Hanson provides a few examples in a recent commentary, and I will add some others. For example, perhaps you have noticed the disappearance of all the protests. Where is Antifa and BLM? A week or two before the election, the flood of violence in cities subsided, perhaps for fear that it might affect the election. Has systemic racism and excessive force by police just disappeared? What about all the concerns about the coronavirus? Not so long ago, Andrew Cuomo, Joe Biden, and Kamala Harris expressed their concerns about the Trump vaccine. Now it seems like it'll be successful. They might even decide to call it the Biden vaccine. And isn't it interesting that Pfizer only announced their progress on the vaccine after the election? In fact, this summer, executives at the company did not update the president or the media about their progress. They only contacted the Biden campaign. 3 months ago, we were hearing from Democratic leaders that it was dangerous to send kids back to school. That's why we had to shut down the schools and reject the calls from the president and the Secretary of Education to get students back in the classroom. Now it's time for the kids to go back to school. You know, 4 years ago, many Democratic leaders and the media suspected that voting machines might have been hacked. Even last year, you had Senator Elizabeth Warren concerned about unsecured computer systems and ambiguous rules about matching signatures on ballots. Now they argue the electoral system is perfect. Any claims of fraud are either insignificant or non-existent. Yes, so much has changed in the last few weeks, and it is tempting to think that all of us have been played. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll get to some more phone calls in just a minute. But we did talk about China. I will get back to Russia and this incredible, it's called the hack of the century, a Russian hack of 18,000 private and government users and using tainted software and all that. But one of the things we mentioned just a minute ago is a very good piece, Penna, what you have in front of you here, by John Ratcliffe. Again, if you're not familiar with him, he is the Director of National Intelligence, and he wrote a very good piece that came out just the other day in the Wall Street Journal that just documented how China wants to dominate the United States and the rest of the world militarily, technologically, economically, and much, much more.
Yeah, I started making a list, but you'd need a long list. He really concisely lays it out in the article that came out December 4th. But Beijing, as Ratliff, who is the Director of National Intelligence, as you said, that Beijing intends to dominate the U.S. and the rest of the planet economically, militarily, and technologically. And they should be our national security focus going forward. They're the main focus. And he uses 3 R words: rob, replicate, and replace. Mm-hmm. Rob us of our intellectual property, replicate our technology, and replace U.S. firms in the global marketplace. And they steal trade secrets, which has resulted in the loss of shareholder value, the loss of many jobs, and stealing defense technology. And I will mention, I read today that there is an arsenal of thousands of ground-launched precision missiles that China has, and a lot of them are along the eastern coast because they want to be prepared if they ever go after Taiwan, that the U.S. would not be able to stop them from doing that. So there's just there's so much going around the world with regard to what China's trying to do to gain control. And so Donald Trump was working on our trade relationship, and he was poking China in various ways. And it's one of the biggest reasons why, in a sense, it's too bad he didn't have another 4 years to work on that relationship. But it's going to be a major problem, and we're going to have to place a lot of our focus on China.
The President Xi Jinping, has instituted several initiatives. One is called the Belt and Road Initiative, sort of trying to recapture the old Silk Road that made China a very popular trading place. And then I think he called it China 2025, where they don't say dominate the world. They say they want to be the world's leader in technology, artificial intelligence, and several technology aspects there. So the question has been, because of the Communist Party, how much freedom do companies have? Because they're a major sponsor in an awful lot of companies there. And they've been expanding that here recently. It was declining over several years. It is now expanding, especially during the lockdown that created a number of financial problems for companies. But we saw something of this here recently when Jack Ma's Ant Group was getting ready to do an IPO, initial public offering, and right before it happened, just a few days before it happened, the Chinese government put a stop on that, and Jack Ma's group had to make a number of concessions. Now, he would say, and this is a billionaire, one of the largest companies and the big tech companies in China, he would normally say, we're independent of the government and so forth, but by doing that, by stopping that IPO, creating all kinds of problems for them, you could argue it's a subtle way to say, we just want you to know where you're based and who's the boss here. So we're seeing a lot of that. And in terms of military expansion, of course, for several years now, they've been building islands in the South China Sea.
That's one of the things that's in there, yeah.
And they go and drop sand and build islands. Now they put military bases on those islands. And then once they build the island and put a military base on it, when the U.S. passes by one of these things, and we've been doing this intentionally to say, no, this is open water, this is international seaways, you do not control this, they would raise complaints about, now you're coming close to you're invading our area. No, this was international water, has been for a long time. And now Australia has really come up to a bump.
Yes,
with
they did
China
the other day. Yeah, good point.
And then, of course, there's the piece that you posted by Conrad Black out of National Review, China's Horrific Triumph, in which, it's still, I think, not known or up for argument whether the COVID crisis was caused by some kind of bacteriological warfare plan that China had. But whether or not that's the case, what the COVID crisis, the pandemic, was a perfect opportunity for China. And they used draconian methods to control it in their own country, but they did nothing to stop people from leaving and spreading it around the world. And then, of course, with all of our lockdowns in all the Western countries shuttering their economies, they've benefited in comparison with us because they handled it in a manner that no free country could possibly handle it. And so they've benefited from this virus, and they've taken full advantage of it. And that is, he calls it China's horrific triumph. Yes. It is horrific.
And in the last paragraph talks about the fact that, first of all, let's remind ourselves Donald Trump is still the president and Mike Pompeo is still the Secretary of State. But okay, if you look ahead and say, well, indeed, if Mr. Biden does take office, we've already talked about his connection with China. How about the fact that he's made as nominee Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who doesn't seem to be very critical of China either. And there have been some that have said that China maybe tried to manipulate the election because they didn't want to have to deal with Donald Trump. And with Joe Biden, they know exactly what they're going to get.
Yeah, I think they feel like it couldn't have gotten worse than Donald Trump, so anybody would have been better than Trump, because Trump made this. Let's be clear, Trump made China a national issue.
Yes, he did.
Prior to that, Russia was, we sort of looked at Russia. Trump has had a long time objection against China for several reasons, some I think valid, maybe some not so valid, but he raised the issue and raised the awareness of China and has put them on the agenda in ways that nobody prior to that has. So if you're moving to, and a lot of Biden's people are Obama retreads.
Yes, they are.
And they did not see China as a major issue. They may not. They may have changed their mind. Joe Biden is implying that he is going to be tough on China. We'll see if that happens.
Yeah.
But Donald Trump deserves a certain amount of credit for creating an awareness that there's a lot of issues in China that have been under the radar for an awful lot of times. I read a book on the China Century, I think we called it, 2005, an American scholar writing on this, talking about the real problem there, intellectual property theft, tech transfer, and stealing some of our stuff. So that was in 2005 that he wrote the book, and it was common knowledge then among people who dealt with them.
But again, what has been happening, and let's blame both Republicans and Democrats, they've just turned a blind eye to that. Say, well, we're not going to actually raise that issue. Now, there are some suggestions. Gordon Chang, I mentioned his name a couple times. Right. You've had him speak at IPI. He's been in the studio. Yes. And he said maybe it's time to just think seriously about closing down these consulates, because we closed down, again, let's give Mike Pompeo some credit here, closed down the Houston consulate. But if you look at the number of spies that are associated with the consulates, and you're talking about San Francisco and New York and a number of places, and then you look at the Confucius Institutes on all these universities, and then just the hundreds of thousands of Chinese students here who all are required to report back to the consulate anything they find out. We have a spy network from China in America that needs to be addressed.
And just to be clear, China is evolving. Once Deng Xiaoping became the head of China, we thought there was a major opening there. They wanted to open up to free markets and so forth. That happened through the 80s, 90s. As we move into 2000, things begin to change some. So there are people who are not changing their opinion. They're sort of looking back. China today is not the China it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So things have changed there, and they've evolved in a way that are not as friendly towards us as we had hoped 20 years ago.
Yes. Well, let's take a break, and we'll come back. We'll take some more phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. And as I've mentioned before, we are coming to year's end, and I know a lot of you probably wait to the last day, but I hope you won't, because we all know what happens next week. It's Christmas, and you get so involved and everything. So even as we go to a break, this would be a great time for you to go to our website, which is pointofview.net, and it is entitled Like Never Before. You probably have heard a few things today you've heard nowhere else. And I think if nothing else, we say like never before, we need truth. We need to know where we can go and get information. And we've had a conversation about China. Let's acknowledge how little you'll hear about that. If you're in the NBA right now and criticize China, if you're in Hollywood and criticize China, you're not even going to have a chance to make a comment about it. And that's what we've been talking about. Come back from the break, we're going to get into some other topics, but I would encourage you as we go to a break to click on that button, because as I've mentioned before, we have a matching fund, and that came down just the other day. So I know some of you like to see your money increased, and so that means your gift will be doubled. And so take the time to click on that button. Of course, our pledge line, if you want to talk to someone off air, 800-347-5151. We'll be right back.
We all love buy one, get one free, and I've got a deal like that to tell you about. But first, as you listen to the news, do you ever feel like you're living in a different world from some people? The expert on one channel says something totally opposite from the expert on another. Finding the truth usually takes being willing to challenge both sides. It requires discernment, inspired by commitment to God's Word, and a willingness to do your own research. And that describes Kerby Anderson and the team here at Point of View Radio. We are reaching a lot of people in these days of lockdowns and restrictions, and your support reaches even more right now during our $100,000 matching challenge. You invest, and whatever you give is doubled up to $100,000. It's sort of like buy one, get one free. So please give today at pointofview.net/year-end or call 1-800-347-5151. Make a big difference. Pointofview.net/year-end and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
half hour. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. I see some of you want to talk about China. Some of you want to talk about the vaccine. We will take all of those. But one last point. Today, there was supposed to be a report from the intelligence community about the extent of foreign influence in the 2020 elections. And there are a lot of people that have been arguing that there is indeed evidence that the Communist Chinese tried to interfere with the election. And the director of National Counterintelligence Security Center warned that Communist China back in July was expanding its attempt to influence the election. So since the report's not there, we can't speculate on it. But both John Ratcliffe, who we've quoted before, and the outgoing Attorney General, William Barr, didn't he do a good job, even though some people have been critical of him, even told Wolf Blitzer back in September that China was being more aggressive and more assertive in attempting to influence the election. And as we pointed out, I think China probably said, we'd rather have Joe Biden than Donald Trump. And so we'll find out when that report comes out what really was the fact.
Better have somebody on your payroll to be, to be working for you.
Isn't that bad? Well, let's take some phone calls here, and we'll go to Martha. Martha, I think you want to talk about the vaccine and the pandemic, so you have the floor.
Well, that's what I wanted to talk about until you talked about China. So can I change my talk to
You
China?
sure can. That would be great, too.
Okay. When you were speaking, I heard something, or on the news, I think it was, about a group called Open Books. And they were talking about how you can go online and you can look at who contributes to the politicians that we're actually electing.
Yeah, it's openthebooks.com. Openthebooks.com.
Okay. Yeah. So the thing is, we need to sort of wake up, and get our heads out of the sand. I hear a lot of fear out there, and we've got a lot to deal with, and I'm afraid too. But the thing is, as people, if we love this country, we're going to have to wise up, look at what we're electing and what we're doing, and try to put a stop to it, resist it, and at least be aware of what's happening when it's happening. And then that was my China comment. And then the thing with the vaccine, we're pretty lucky to have the option, and it is a personal choice. And I'm scared, and I'm 55 and above, but the thing is, I want to hug my grandkids. I want to go out, and staying at home and being controlled and accepting this sort of soft control that the government's doing now, it's not going to stay soft. We're going to have to wise up, figure it out, find out what's going on, and stand up for what's right. We can't control everything, but we're allowing ourselves to be controlled, and it's such a giant thing that's happening where they pacify the public, and now we've got legalized marijuana. Let's just stay home and be high. But what about the future of our kids?
Well, with the donations, we have a pretty good tracking system for people who are making direct campaign contributions to the president or a political candidate. It's different in states when you're talking about a state legislator, or somebody running for mayor or something, but we have a pretty good tracking system for that. But there is all kinds of money going to super PACs and other things which you may or may not know about, because Jones may pass money to Smith, who may pass money to Green, and then Green takes that money and gives it to a super PAC or something, and it's hard to track that money, and that's why speculations about George Soros and other people are rampant out there, because some of the money is hard to track. Now, as IPI is a 501c3 nonprofit charity, and so we do not have to reveal who our donations come from or the amount of them. That's a lot, and I think that's a good idea, because we've seen when there's a campaign going on, say for instance to limit abortions or something in a state, those donors make money, give money to that campaign, and people on the left may find out about it. They go target that person's house. They target that. People have been fired for doing things like that. So you want a certain amount of anonymity there, but it also opens the door for a lot of money funneling hands in various ways that we don't know where it comes from.
I remember Al Gore going to a Buddhist temple and talking to some monks and having some money, which was back to the China issue. And that goes back almost a decade or two. But again, that's been going around for some time. Penna?
You know, Martha talked about feeling powerless. And I think with regard to China, in a sense, we do feel powerless because both parties in our country have, in a sense, benefited from relationships with China. Big businesses have. And then we go all the way back to the Clinton years when we used to, I know that we monitored a lot of campaign events, people that would bundle donations.
Oh, yes.
And, you know, it's illegal for a foreign country to give to an American campaign. So those of us who were worried about the activities of the Clintons were trying to watch that. And then that kind of all faded away as we benefited, I think, or a lot of people in the country benefited from the relationship with China. And, of course, trade was opened up. They joined the World Trade Organization, and there was a lot of hope, as Buddy mentioned. But we saw that they don't really change from their totalitarian instincts and ways. And so they're now apparently an enemy. And so I think it's good for lots of people to be reporting on this. I worry about who does and who doesn't. Our media is controlled by the left. So I appreciate her call and just her mentioning that and talking about that way that we as Americans feel. I think information, though, is power. And we do try to provide as much as possible here.
Let's take another phone call. We'll head to Georgia on the Good News Network. Mark, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for calling and taking my call. I guess my basic question is, shouldn't we expect as an American citizen our president-elect be open and honest about any relationship that he may have or his family members may have with a foreign country, as well as be open to the idea of let's have an open and honest election count. So if I am elected president, at least I have knowledge and the people know I have been truly elected. Thank you, and I'll stand by.
Well, I think you've got some good points there. Let's take them one at a time. First of all, open and honest about your connections. I mean, they made a big deal about the supposed connections or possible connections between Donald Trump and Russia.
Yes, they did. And they seem to...
legitimate.
That doesn't seem to be nearly as interesting to the media today about Joe Biden and China. They just, for some reason, that just doesn't seem to be on their... though it may be that after Joe Biden is actually sworn in as president, that they may become more interested in that, because then maybe you win, a Pulitzer Prize or a journalist thing if you're able to expose certain things. But and especially if that undermines Joe Biden's power and ultimately gets them Kamala Harris, which is, I think, some of them would really like to see.
I think that's okay. But again, here's one from National Public Radio, and you've seen enough of these polls. But overall, do you trust the results of the 2020 election are accurate? And you have 72% of Republicans go, no, I'm not really convinced of it. And independents, 28%, overall about 34% of the country. And I've seen some where the numbers are higher, some of that are lower. And so you really, if you're the next president of the United States, you want something where some people get behind you. And of course, 4 years ago, we were hearing, I'm not going to go, members of Congress saying, I'm not going to go to the inauguration. We're going to resist him. We're going to try to push him out. We're going to try to prove Russian collusion. I just think you've got the reverse of it right now with a lot of people that are looking at some of these states, and that's Wisconsin and Michigan and Georgia and Nevada, Arizona, and saying some of it doesn't just look quite well in light of some of the testimony that's being surfaced in some of these state hearings, and then just the other day in a Senate hearing. So what about this?
So you had a number of Democrats who at the time said Donald Trump is not a legitimate president. I believe Hillary Clinton and several others made those sorts of claims, and they spent 4 years trying to attack him and get him out. So I find it the height of hypocrisy for many of them to now turn around and say, can't we all just be nice and be friends, and can't you just accept the election as is?
Calling what is going on with investigating these states a conspiracy theory.
Right.
I mean,
and to be fair, though, that none of the states have come up so far and been able to say we have found large areas of collusion or fraud or anything. They found some, and mostly small, and they would argue that it's not major amounts to be able to overturn or change the election. And we've been talking about this for years. There's small amounts of fraud in every election. We know that is going on. We know some here in Texas, but whether or not that would change the election is different.
Yes. Well, and again, there may be a challenge on January 6th, and we will see. And already, was it Mo Brooks, who is a member of the House? And after hearing all the things that certainly Rand Paul said the other day, maybe he'd be the one from the Senate. And if indeed that is the
one
case,
from the House and Senate,
you have to have one from the House, one from the Senate. It has to be written. And we've had this happen twice.
Might have Ron Johnson.
Yeah, Ron Johnson be another, because of that. And so if that's the case, we've had two cases where that has developed, when Richard Nixon was elected and also when George W. Bush was elected. So this might be a third. We'll see. We'll be right back.
Election battles have not delayed the rollout of the left's agenda on abortion. Last week, a hearing before a subcommittee of the powerful House Appropriations Committee considered a repeal of the Hyde Amendment. The title of the hearing was "The Impact on Women Seeking an Abortion But Are Denied Because of an Inability to Pay." The Hyde Amendment, which has been renewed annually since 1976, protects taxpayers from being required to foot the bill for most abortions. Representative Rosa DeLauro, incoming chair of the House Appropriations Committee, calls the Hyde Amendment discriminatory policy and an issue of racial injustice. Going forward, she does not plan to incorporate it into appropriations bills. Most Americans, even those who support legal abortion, do not think taxpayers should have to pay for it, for poor women or anyone. They don't want the blood of millions of abortion victims on their hands, says Father Frank Pavone, head of Priests for Life. It's estimated that the Hyde Amendment has saved 2.4 million lives, recently about 60,000 per year. As Family Research Council points out, our tax dollars prop up the abortion industry. There's a bill to stop this, the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act. If it ever becomes law, we won't need a Hyde Amendment. Until then, pro-lifers will have to fight hard to protect it. What else does the left have planned to expand access to abortion? They want to reinstate taxpayer funding to groups that promote abortion overseas. This is called the Mexico City policy. With its repeal, Americans will again become the world's top exporter of abortion. The pro-abortion left plans to restore Title X family planning funding to Planned Parenthood and to deny it to pro-life pregnancy centers. They plan to scrutinize and reject pro-life laws states pass. They want to roll back safety standards for chemical abortion drugs. Pro-lifers must remain vigilant and seize every opportunity to pass legislation to block this abortion extremism. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, let me just mention that Penna Dexter's commentary today, which we'll mention in just a minute, is on the extreme abortion agenda. But I also wanted to continue taking some of the phone calls. And I will admit right now we actually have more phone calls than we have time to cover. But I at least wanted to put one more on the table. And that is Pam in Georgia, WLPE. And what would you like to add to our conversation?
Yes, thanks for taking my call. I'm just very, very concerned about having someone like Joe Biden at the helm when he is so compromised with his own and his family's deep ties and obligations to China, and they will not hesitate to use that and try to force him into doing or not doing their bidding. And I just think he's the worst possible person that could be at the helm. I really do. And I think President Trump knew what the Chinese were doing, and that's why they worked through their underlings or surrogates or whatever you want to call them to try and get him out. So
I'm concerned about it, too. I have a question for you, Pam, on the Senate
Yes.
race. Do you think that in Georgia, people are coming out to help watch the polls and watch what's going on? I mean, I know early voting is already going on there, and we've already, tried to show that things were not always on the up and up, that poll watchers
Correct.
couldn't see what was going on. So what's going on now?
Well, as a matter of fact, I voted today, and I don't. It was sort of strange. I have a military ID, and this it took them some time to, I guess, compare my signature with that on my ID, and then they took my ID, and I guess I waited about 15 minutes, which I thought was a little strange. I don't know. They really never explained why. I couldn't tell who was doing what, And the thing that bothers me, Penna, is that the voting machines are still broken, if you want to put it like that. And nothing's been done to fix them, other than that our Secretary of State signed an agreement with Stacey Abrams and the Democrats that he would certify the results. They didn't change anything, and he didn't really legally. I don't think he really had the right to do that. That's a legislative issue, but not an executive one. So I was waiting as late as I could to vote, thinking maybe they would fix something. But and to answer your question, I really can't say that there were any poll watchers. I did see people directing me toward certain points in the room, but I don't know if they were watching the poll. They looked like they were taking active participation in the process, so I'm not thinking they were poll watchers.
Well, that's one thing. I guess also, though, the counting of the vote, of mail-in votes and things like that, that's where there's been a lot of issues, and I just wondered if you were in the know with regard to how that's going.
No, and I think that Georgia did have a pretty strict rule for absentee voters and ballots, and you had to practically be on your deathbed or in a wheelchair to get one. It wasn't really that bad. I don't want to say that, but you couldn't just get one because it's raining today.
Right.
I don't want to go.
That.
And they need to change that back because it's too easy and it encourages fraud, I think.
And Pam, I think I saw today that I think it was 76,000 people have registered to vote in Georgia since early December, which I guess they have to maybe wait 30 days after that. So that struck me as a large number who are registering in order to be able to vote in a Senate election.
That's kind of scary.
I wonder if they all have the same address.
Yeah. Or some of them are from out of state that just moved there.
I wonder if they have a Georgia address.
Yes, for sure. Let me, just before we wind down today, mention that one of our articles, the third article, talks about the media's fawning coverage of Biden nominees. And that's why I hope you'll be listening to Point of View, because we're going to give you the straight story. But Penna Dexter's commentary today is also about what is going to be kind of this coming extreme abortion agenda. And we are dedicated to telling you the truth. And Penna, your Viewpoints commentary today is, again, something we talk about on Point of View, but you're probably not going to hear this in the mainstream media.
Yeah, I mean, some conservative shows are talking about the identity picks, and most of them are identity picks.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, I asked a buddy earlier today during a break, are there any white males in the cabinet? And I guess there are a couple. But yes, the abortion agenda is extreme, and the first thing that will happen, and this will happen probably legislatively, is the Hyde Amendment. The Hyde Amendment is passed going on to certain appropriations bills every year since 1976 to keep taxpayers from having to pay for abortions. And Biden came out against it, and I'm sure that this, he will push the Congress to repeal the Hyde Amendment, not to add it. All they have to do is really not add it to various bills. But other things that President Trump did, he did by executive order. For instance, presidents are always deciding what they're going to do about funding overseas abortion through the Mexico City policy. and this president will immediately repeal the Mexico City policy. And the Title X family planning funding, President Trump cleaned that up, and he got states the rights to withhold family planning money from Planned Parenthood. That was done by executive order. You know, Biden will just turn that around. There are many things that will be done that way. So when you have a new president coming in that's to the left, the abortion policies, most of them will move to the left. That's why it's important when you have a Congress that's favorable to pro-life policies, get some good pro-life legislation passed, and the states especially. And since we've got so many conservatives that control state houses, this is a good time to look at what you can do to limit abortion in your state.
So again, you can find Penna Dexter's Viewpoints commentary on our website today. If you sign up, you'll receive it in your inbox tomorrow. So that's one thing. Let me also talk for just a minute about Dr. Merrill Matthews, IPI.org. One of the articles that we posted is actually the first article, Biden Take Note, Businesses Flee to Texas because Economic Policies Matter. And another one I thought I'd mention as I scroll down, fake COVID-19 vaccines demonstrate yet again the threat of importing drugs. One of the warnings I think we should have, Dr. Matthews, which again is a reason for people to go to IPI.org and hopefully support your organization, is we might have some people starting to advertise for cheap vaccines, and they're not. There's no quality control for those.
Interpol, FDA, and others are already noticing groups that are coming up and posting online that they have vials of the vaccine, and if you just send them some money, they'll send you the vaccine. These are almost certainly fake. If they're not fake, they're almost certainly compromised by the fact that they couldn't be refrigerated or something of that nature. So go to a pharmacist that you can trust if you're going to get it, or to a doctor or hospital or something. Don't try to do this over the internet, because you're almost certainly going to get something that's fake and may actually harm you.
If you don't see them taking it out of a box that has dry ice, run, right? Because the Pfizer one has to be, what, minus 70 or something like that?
Minus 90 degrees Fahrenheit, 94 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah, I said 90 before, and then somebody corrected me and said 70, but so you're right.
It's 70 for Celsius.
Okay, there we go. Okay, there we go. And so I was wondering why I was hearing 70 and 90. Now I got it. But nevertheless, again, IPI.org, and of course our website today is one where I would encourage you to consider not only supporting the Institute for Policy Innovation, but I hope you'll support us as well. I'm sure that you've heard some things today that you maybe have never heard before, and we are going to be covering a lot more on Monday. Rod Dreyer's going to be with us, and we'll be talking about his book, Live Not by Lies, but we'll also be talking about some of his observations that are, I think, very relevant to some of the issues that we've been talking about here on Point of View. And we'll be covering all of that. I will be actually off Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. So let me first of all say to both of you, Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
And look forward to seeing Penna and Kelly back on December 31st. But I hope you'll have a great weekend. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. We will see you back here on Monday right here on Point of View.
We all love buy one, get one free. And I've got a deal like that to tell you about. But first, as you listen to the news, do you ever feel like you're living in a different world from some people? The expert on one channel says something totally opposite from the expert on another. Finding the truth usually takes being willing to challenge both sides. It requires discernment, inspired by commitment to God's Word, and a willingness to do your own research. And that describes Kerby Anderson and the team here at Point of View Radio. We are reaching a lot of people in these days of lockdowns and restrictions, and your support reaches even more right now during our $100,000 matching challenge. You invest, and whatever you give is doubled up to $100,000. It's sort of like buy one, get one free. So please give today at pointofview.net/year-end or call 1-800-347-5151. Make a big difference. Pointofview.net/year-end and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I I just want to thank you so much for all that.